The gunshot that killed Franklin Barrett echoed through the Arizona Territory morning, and his daughter Fiona knew in that instant that everything she had ever known was about to crumble like dust. She stood frozen in the doorway of their small homestead, watching her father collapse into the dirt, his weathered hands clutching at nothing. The two men on horseback who had fired the shots were already riding away, their laughter carried back on the hot wind that swept across the desert landscape. Fiona wanted to scream, wanted to run to him, but her legs would not move. Time seemed to stretch impossibly thin, each second an eternity of horror. Finally, her body obeyed and she ran to where her father lay. Blood pooled beneath him, soaking into the thirsty earth. His eyes found hers, and she saw the apology in them before he could speak the words. "The debt," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Fiona, I am sorry. I gambled it all away, the land, everything. They will come for it." "Father, please," she begged, pressing her hands against the wound in his chest, feeling his life slip away between her fingers. "Do not leave me. I cannot do this alone." "You are stronger than you know," he said, and then he was gone, his eyes going empty and distant, staring up at the endless blue sky above them. Fiona sat there in the dirt beside her father's body for a long time, the sun climbing higher, the heat becoming oppressive. She was 21 years old, and she had just become completely alone in the world. Her mother had died of fever 3 years prior, and now her father had followed, leaving her with nothing but debts, and the certainty that the men who owned those debts would come to collect. They came that very afternoon. 3 men rode up to the homestead, their faces hard and unforgiving. The leader, a thin man with a scar across his cheek, dismounted and walked toward where Fiona sat on the porch. She had wrapped her father's body in a blanket and dragged it to the shade, not knowing what else to do. "Franklin Barrett owed our boss $5,000, the scarred man said, his voice flat and emotionless. "Since he cannot pay, we are taking the land and everything on it." "You killed him," Fiona said, her voice shaking with grief and rage. "Your men shot him this morning." "That was unfortunate business," the man replied, not sounding sorry at all. "But debt is debt, girl. You have until tomorrow morning to clear out. Anything you leave behind becomes ours." They left her there, and Fiona felt the full weight of her situation crash down upon her. She had no money, no family, nowhere to go. The small amount of food in the house would last maybe a week if she rationed it carefully. She had 2 dresses, both worn and faded, a pair of boots with holes in the soles, and a wagon with 1 broken wheel. Her father's horse had been taken by the men as partial payment toward his debt. That night, she buried her father in the hard ground behind the house, digging by lamplight because she could not bear to wait until morning. Her hands blistered and bled, but she kept digging until the hole was deep enough. She said a prayer over him, though she was not sure she believed anyone was listening anymore. At dawn, she loaded what little she could carry into a canvas bag and began walking. She had heard there was a town called Alta about 15 miles west, and it was the only destination she could think of. The sun rose hot and merciless, and soon her dress was soaked with sweat. The landscape was brutal and beautiful at once, all red rock and scrub brush, with mountains rising in the distance like the bones of some ancient creature. By midday, her water was gone, and she was beginning to stumble. The heat was unlike anything she had experienced, radiating up from the ground and pressing down from above. She thought she might die out here, just like her father had died, alone and forgotten. That was when she saw the rider. He approached from the north, a tall figure on a dark horse, and for a moment Fiona thought perhaps she was hallucinating. But as he drew closer, she could see he was real, A man in his late 20s with sun-darkened skin and brown eyes that assessed her situation in an instant. "You need help," he said, dismounting. It was not a question. "I am fine," Fiona lied, swaying on her feet. The man pulled a canteen from his saddle and held it out to her. "Drink. You will be dead in another hour if you keep walking in this heat without water." Pride made her want to refuse, but thirst was stronger. She took the canteen and drank deeply, the water the sweetest thing she had ever tasted. When she finished, she handed it back to him and found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "Alta," she said. "I have nowhere else to go. Alta is still 10 miles from here. You will not make it on foot in this condition." He studied her for a moment longer, then made a decision. "I have a ranch about 5 miles south. You can rest there, get proper food and water, and I will take you to Alta tomorrow if that is still what you want." Fiona looked at this stranger, trying to determine if she could trust him. She had little choice. If she refused his help, she would likely die. If she accepted and he had ill intentions, she would be at his mercy. But something in his eyes seemed honest, and she was too exhausted to refuse. "Thank you," she said quietly. He helped her up onto his horse and then mounted behind her. His arms came around her to hold the reins, and Fiona felt suddenly very aware of his presence, the solidness of him, the steady beat of his heart against her back. They rode in silence, and she found herself drifting, lulled by the horse's gait and her own exhaustion. When she woke, she was lying on a bed in a cool, dark room. For a moment she panicked, unsure of where she was or how much time had passed. Then memory returned and she sat up quickly, looking around. The room was simple but clean, with whitewashed walls and a window that showed the sun much lower in the sky than it had been. She could hear sounds from elsewhere in the house, the clatter of dishes, footsteps. Fiona stood and smoothed down her dress, then walked to the door and opened it carefully. She found herself in a hallway that led to a main room with a large fireplace and sturdy furniture. The man who had rescued her was standing at a table, setting out plates. "You are awake," he said when he saw her. "Good, you should eat, you are too thin." "I do not even know your name," Fiona said, suddenly feeling awkward and out of place. Yates Johnson, and you are, Fiona Barrett." "Well, Fiona Barrett, sit down and eat. We can talk after." The food was simple but plentiful. Bread, beans, salted beef, and fresh tomatoes from what must be a garden. Fiona ate slowly at first, then more quickly as her hunger overcame her. Yates ate as well, not speaking, just letting her satisfy her appetite. When they had both finished, he poured coffee for them both and sat back in his chair, studying her with those serious brown eyes. "Tell me what happened," he said. "Why were you walking alone through the desert with no water?" Fiona found herself telling him everything, the words spilling out in a rush. She told him about her father's gambling, the debt, the murder, the men who had come to take their land. She told him about burying her father by lamplight and setting out for Alta because she had nowhere else to go. By the time she finished, tears were streaming down her face and she wiped at them angrily, embarrassed to be crying in front of this stranger. "I am sorry," she said. "I should not burden you with my troubles." "You have been through something terrible," Yates said, his voice gentle. "You are allowed to cry." "I just do not know what to do now," Fiona admitted. "I have no money, no skills that would earn me a wage. I have nothing to offer anyone." The words hung in the air between them, and Yates leaned forward, his expression intense. "You are wrong about that," he said. "But we will figure it out. For tonight you are safe here. Tomorrow we will make a plan." Fiona looked at this man who had shown her such unexpected kindness, and she felt something shift inside her chest. Hope, maybe, or something even more dangerous. That night, Yates gave her his bed and insisted he would sleep in the main room. Fiona protested, but he would not hear of it. She lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of this place, and thought about how strange it was that a day could change everything. In the morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She dressed quickly and found Yates already up, making breakfast. "I have been thinking," he said as she entered the room. "I run this ranch alone, and it is too much work for one person. I could use help. If you are willing to work, you could stay here. I would pay you a fair wage and provide room and board." Fiona stared at him, not quite believing what she was hearing. "You would do that? For someone you just met?" "I am not doing it out of charity," Yates said, though they both knew that was at least partly a lie. "I genuinely need help. The cattle need tending, the garden needs work, the house needs maintaining. It is more than I can manage alone." "I do not know much about ranching," Fiona admitted. "I can teach you, if you are willing to learn." Fiona thought about her other options, which were essentially non-existent. She could go to Alta and hope to find work there, but towns in the territory were not exactly welcoming to single women with no references. She could try to make her way to California, but that would require money she did not have. Or she could accept this man's offer and at least have food and shelter while she figured out her next step. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will stay and work, thank you." Yates nodded, a small smile crossing his face. "Good. Finish your breakfast and I will show you around." The ranch was larger than Fiona had realized. Yates had about 200 acres of grazing land with a herd of cattle that numbered close to 100 head. There was a large garden, a chicken coop, a barn with 3 horses, and various outbuildings. It was clear that he had been telling the truth about needing help. One person could not possibly manage all of this alone. They spent the day working together, and Yates patiently showed her how to do various tasks. Fiona had grown up on a small homestead, so she was not completely ignorant of farm work, but ranching was different in scale and complexity. Still, she was a quick learner, and by the end of the day, she felt like she had at least some idea of what she was doing. Over dinner that night, they talked more, and Fiona learned about Yates's life. He had come to Arizona 5 years ago from Texas, seeking to start his own ranch. He had built everything here with his own hands, clearing the land, constructing the buildings, and buying his initial stock with money he had saved from working other ranches. He was 29 years old and had never been married. Why not? Fiona asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "I am sorry, that is none of my business." "It is all right," Yates said. "The truth is, ranching does not leave much time for courting. And the few women in the territory are either already married or not interested in the hard life of a ranch wife. I have made peace with the idea that I might always be alone." There was a sadness in his voice that made Fiona's heart ache. She knew something about loneliness, about feeling like you would never quite fit anywhere. "I am sure the right woman will come along," she said quietly. Yates looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes, then turned his attention back to his food. The days began to blur together in a pleasant rhythm. Fiona woke early each morning and helped Yates with the animals. She learned to milk the cow, gather eggs, feed the chickens. She learned to ride, though at first she was terrified of the horses. Yates was patient, never pushing her beyond what she could handle, always ready with encouragement or instruction. In the afternoons, she worked in the garden, tending the vegetables that would see them through the coming winter. She learned which plants needed more water, which ones attracted pests, how to preserve and can for the lean months. The work was hard and left her exhausted at the end of each day, but it was honest work, and she found satisfaction in it. In the evenings, after dinner, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the distant mountains. Sometimes they talked, and sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence. Fiona found herself looking forward to these quiet moments, to the sound of Yates's voice, to the way he sometimes laughed at her observations about ranch life. Weeks passed, and Fiona realized she had not thought about going to Alta in quite some time. She was settling in here, finding a place for herself. More than that, she was finding herself drawn to Yates in ways that both excited and frightened her. She caught herself watching him as he worked, admiring the strength in his arms, the concentration on his face. She found excuses to be near him, to ask him questions, to hear his voice. And she thought, sometimes, that maybe he felt the same. She would catch him looking at her with an expression that made her heart race. He found reasons to touch her, a hand on her shoulder when showing her how to properly saddle a horse, his fingers brushing hers when passing tools. The air between them seemed charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. One evening in late August, a storm rolled in from the west, dark clouds piling up against the mountains. They hurried to get the animals secured before the rain started, working together with practiced efficiency. By the time they finished, the first drops were falling, fat and heavy. They ran for the house, laughing as the rain intensified, but they were both soaked by the time they got inside. Fiona stood dripping on the floor, her dress plastered to her body, her hair hanging in wet ropes. Yates looked no better, his shirt clinging to his chest. "I will get towels," he said, disappearing into the back room. Fiona stood there, suddenly very aware of her appearance, of how the wet dress revealed the shape of her body. When Yates returned with the towels, she saw his eyes widen slightly before he looked away, handing her a towel without meeting her gaze. "You should change into dry clothes," he said, his voice rough. "You will catch a chill." Fiona went to her room and changed, her hands shaking slightly. Something had shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of attraction that could not be taken back. When she returned to the main room, Yates had also changed and was building up the fire to chase away the sudden cold that had come with the storm. They made dinner together, moving around each other in the small kitchen with an ease born of weeks of practice. But now there was a tension underneath, a heightened awareness of every accidental touch, every shared glance. After dinner, they sat by the fire, listening to the rain hammer against the roof. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and lightning flashed in the windows, followed by rolling thunder. "I have been meaning to ask you something," Yates said, breaking the long silence. "What is that? Do you ever regret staying here? Do you wish you had gone to Alta, tried to find a different life?" Fiona thought about the question carefully. "No," she said finally. "I do not regret it. This place, this work, it has given me something I did not have before. Purpose, I suppose." And she hesitated, then continued, "I have been happier here than I have been in a long time." "I am glad," Yates said quietly. "I have been happier too. Having you here, it has made everything better. The work is easier with two, yes, but it is more than that. The house feels less empty. I feel less alone." Fiona's heart was pounding now, and she turned to look at him. In the firelight, his face was all plains and shadows, beautiful in a way she had not let herself fully acknowledge before. "Yates," she said, not sure what words would follow. He stood abruptly, crossing to the window, his back to her. "I should not have said that. You work for me, and it is not appropriate for me to speak to you this way. I apologize." "No," Fiona said, standing as well. "Do not apologize. I feel it too, this thing between us. I have tried not to, but I cannot help it." He turned to face her, and she saw the conflict in his eyes, want warring with propriety, hope fighting with fear. "You deserve better than this," he said, "better than a struggling rancher in the middle of nowhere. You could go to San Francisco, to Denver, find a life with more opportunities, more comfort." "I do not want that," Fiona said, taking a step toward him. "I want this. I want to be here. With you." The words hung between them, and then Yates was crossing the room to her, his hands coming up to cup her face. He searched her eyes, looking for any doubt, any hesitation. Finding none, he kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might break. But Fiona kissed him back, her hands gripping his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, became more urgent, and she felt heat flood through her body, a wanting she had never experienced before. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "So have I," Fiona whispered back. They stood there for a long moment, just holding each other, listening to the storm rage outside. Then Yates pulled back, his hands still on her shoulders. "We should take this slowly," he said. "I do not want to rush you into anything. I want to do this right." Fiona nodded, understanding what he meant. In this time and place, reputations mattered, and a woman's reputation most of all. If they were going to be together, they needed to do it properly. "I want to court you," Yates said. "With all the proper steps. I want to show you that my intentions are honorable." "I know your intentions are honorable," Fiona said, smiling. "But yes, we can do this properly." In the days that followed, everything changed, and yet nothing changed. They still worked side by side, still shared meals and evening conversations. But now there was an openness between them, an acknowledgement of their feelings. Yates would take her hand as they walked, or press a kiss to her forehead when they said goodnight. Small gestures, but they meant everything. Yates began taking her into Alta on Sundays, so she could attend church services and be seen in town. It was important, he said, that people knew she was respectable, that their situation was proper. Fiona did not care much what people thought, but she understood his reasoning. Alta was a small town, just one main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a few other businesses. The people were friendly enough, though Fiona noticed the women eyed her with curiosity and speculation. She knew they were wondering about her relationship with Yates, about why she was living at his ranch. After church one Sunday in September, Yates took her to the general store to buy supplies. While he was talking with the store owner, an older woman approached Fiona. "You are the girl staying with Yates Johnson, are you not?" the woman asked. "Yes, madam, I work at his ranch." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. "I see. And is he treating you respectfully?" Fiona understood what she was really asking. "Very respectfully. He is a good man." "He is," the woman agreed. "One of the best. We would hate to see him hurt." It was a warning, Fiona realized. These people cared about Yates and were protective of him. She could respect that. "I would never hurt him," Fiona said quietly. "I care about him very much." The woman's expression softened. "I believe you do. Just remember, people talk. Be careful with both your reputations." After they left town, Fiona told Yates about the conversation. He sighed and shook his head. "I should have expected that. People mean well, but they like to gossip." "She was protecting you," Fiona said. "She cares about you, I know, but I wish people would mind their own business sometimes." They rode in silence for a while, then Yates spoke again. "This would all be easier if we were married." Fiona's heart skipped. "Are you asking?" Yates pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her. "Not yet. When I ask you to marry me, it is going to be proper the way it should be, but I am saying that I am thinking about it, that I want it, eventually." "Eventually," Fiona repeated, smiling. "I can wait for eventually." Autumn came to Arizona in subtle ways. The brutal heat eased slightly, and the light took on a golden quality that made everything seem softer. The work on the ranch intensified as they prepared for winter, repairing fences, stocking feed, putting up preserves from the garden. Fiona had been at the ranch for almost 4 months now, and she could hardly remember what her life had been like before. The grief over her father had not disappeared, but it had dulled to a bearable ache, and in its place, something new had grown, a sense of belonging, of home, a feeling of love that became stronger with each passing day. One evening in late October, Yates asked her to take a ride with him. They saddled 2 horses and headed out into the desert, riding until they reached a high point that overlooked the ranch and the valley beyond. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. "I wanted to show you this," Yates said, dismounting and helping her down from her horse. "This is my favorite spot. When things get hard, I come up here to think." They sat on a flat rock and watched the sun sink lower, the shadows lengthening across the land. "Fiona," Yates said, and something in his voice made her turn to look at him. He was holding a small box, and her breath caught in her throat. "When you first came here, you said you had nothing to offer," he continued. "Do you remember?" "Yes," she whispered. "I have thought about those words many times since then, and I want you to know that you were wrong, so wrong." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band. "You have offered me everything. Your presence, your laughter, your strength, your heart. You have turned this ranch into a home. You have turned my life into something worth living. You have offered me love, and that is everything." Tears were streaming down Fiona's face now. "Yates. Fiona Barrett, will you marry me? Will you stay with me, build a life with me, be my partner in all things?" "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and the world fell away until there was nothing but the two of them and the vast sky above. They rode back to the ranch in the dark, but Fiona was not afraid. Yates was beside her, and she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The next Sunday, they announced their engagement to the people of Alta. There was surprise, certainly, but also genuine happiness. The older woman who had warned Fiona weeks earlier came up to congratulate them, tears in her eyes. "I knew it," she said. "I could see it in the way you looked at each other. Blessings to you both." They set the wedding date for November, giving themselves just a few weeks to prepare. There was not much to do, really. Fiona had only the one good dress, which she mended and cleaned as best she could. Yates arranged for the local minister to perform the ceremony. They would have it at the ranch, with just a few friends from town in attendance. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold. Fiona dressed carefully, her hands shaking with nerves and excitement. She looked at herself in the small mirror in her room and hardly recognized the woman staring back. She looked happy. She looked loved. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. They stood in the main room of the ranch house, with about a dozen people gathered around them. Yates wore his best shirt and had slicked his hair back. He could not take his eyes off Fiona. The minister spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through good times and hardship. And when he asked if they would take each other as husband and wife, they both answered without hesitation, "I do. I do." And then Yates was kissing her, and everyone was cheering, and Fiona felt joy so complete it almost hurt. They had a small celebration afterward with food and music. Someone had brought a fiddle, and they danced in the yard as the sun set. Yates held her close, and Fiona rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Happy," he murmured into her hair. "So happy," she replied. "Happier than I ever thought possible." When the last guests had left and they were finally alone, Yates picked her up and carried her across the threshold of their bedroom. He set her down gently, his hands coming up to cradle her face. "I love you," he said. "I will love you every day for the rest of my life." "I love you too," Fiona whispered back. "Thank you for finding me in the desert that day. Thank you for saving me." "No," Yates said, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "You saved me. I was just existing before you came. You made me start living again." They kissed, and it was sweet and tender and full of promise. And then words fell away, and there was only the two of them, learning each other, loving each other, beginning their life together. The first winter as husband and wife was hard but also wonderful. The work was relentless, the cold bitter at times, but they faced it together, and that made all the difference. They would wake before dawn and work until after dark, then fall into bed exhausted but content. Yates taught Fiona more about running the ranch, treating her as a true partner rather than just a helper. They made decisions together, planned for the future together. He valued her opinions and listened when she had ideas about improvements or changes. By spring, Fiona knew she was pregnant. She told Yates one evening after dinner, and the look of pure joy on his face was something she would remember for the rest of her life. "A baby," he said wonderingly, his hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Fiona asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said. "Terrified, certainly, but happy beyond words." The pregnancy was not easy. Fiona was sick in the early months and the heat of summer was oppressive. But Yates was attentive and caring, taking on more of the heavy work and making sure she rested when she needed to. As her belly grew, Fiona found herself thinking about the future in ways she never had before. She imagined a child running through the ranch, learning to ride, helping with chores. She imagined the family they were creating, built on love and hard work and commitment. In October, exactly 1 year after Yates had proposed, Fiona went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when she was afraid, but Yates never left her side. He held her hand, wiped her forehead, whispered encouragement, and then finally a baby's cry filled the room. "A boy," the midwife announced, placing the squalling infant on Fiona's chest. "A healthy baby boy." Fiona looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and dark hair, and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. Yates was crying, she realized, tears streaming down his face as he looked at their child. "He is perfect," Yates said, his voice choked with emotion. "You are perfect. I love you both so much." They named him Samuel after Yates's father. He was a good baby, generally content as long as he was fed and warm. Fiona spent hours just watching him sleep, marveling at the miracle of him. Life with a newborn was exhausting but also joyful. They took turns walking the floor with Samuel when he fussed at night. They celebrated every small milestone, his first smile, the first time he rolled over, his first tooth. As Samuel grew, Fiona found herself thinking often about how far she had come. 2 years ago, she had been alone and desperate, walking through the desert with nothing. Now she had a husband who loved her, a son, a home. She had everything. Yates seemed to be thinking similar thoughts. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching Samuel play with a set of wooden blocks Yates had carved, he reached over and took her hand. "You remember that day I found you?" he asked. "Every moment of it," Fiona replied. "I think about it sometimes. About how easily I could have ridden a different direction, gone to town instead of heading home. We would never have met." "But you did find me," Fiona said, "and here we are, Yates agreed, with everything we could ever want." The years passed and the ranch prospered. They expanded the herd, bought more land, built a larger barn. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic little boy who followed his father everywhere, already learning to ride and help with chores. When Samuel was 3, Fiona became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Lily, and she had her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair. With 2 children, the ranch house felt full and alive in ways it never had before. There was always noise, always activity. Samuel teaching Lily to walk. Yates chasing both children around the yard. The 4 of them sitting down to dinner together, talking about their days. Fiona would sometimes pause in the middle of her work and just look around, taking in the life they had built. The garden she had expanded and improved. The house they had added rooms to, making space for their growing family. The land that stretched out in all directions, all of it theirs, all of it earned through hard work and determination. One summer evening, when Samuel was 7 and Lily was 4, they had dinner outside, enjoying the slight cooling that came with sunset. The children were playing nearby, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. "I was thinking," Yates said, reaching across the table to take Fiona's hand. "Maybe we should take a trip. Go to California, show the children the ocean. We have never had a real holiday." "Can we afford it?" Fiona asked, though the idea was tempting. "I think so. We have had good years, and I want the children to see something beyond Arizona. I want them to understand that the world is bigger than this ranch." They spent the fall planning the trip, and in the spring they loaded the wagon and set out west. It was an adventure, traveling through deserts and mountains, seeing new towns and landscapes. The children were endlessly curious, asking questions about everything they saw. When they finally reached California and Samuel and Lily saw the Pacific Ocean for the first time, their expressions of wonder made the entire difficult journey worthwhile. They spent a week in a small coastal town, playing in the surf, eating fresh fish, exploring tide pools. On their last evening there, after the children had fallen asleep, Fiona and Yates walked along the beach. The moon was full, reflecting off the water in a long silver path. "This has been wonderful," Fiona said, "but I am ready to go home." "So am I," Yates agreed. "As beautiful as this is, it is not home. Home is back in Arizona on our ranch in the life we have built." They stood there for a while, arms around each other, listening to the waves crash against the shore. Then they turned and walked back toward their lodgings, ready to begin the journey home. The trip back seemed shorter, maybe because they knew where they were going, or maybe because they were eager to get there. When the ranch finally came into view, both Fiona and Yates felt a sense of relief and rightness. This was where they belonged. As the children grew older, they became more helpful around the ranch. Samuel was particularly good with the horses, showing a natural skill that impressed his father. Lily loved the garden and spent hours helping her mother tend the plants. Fiona taught both children to read and write, using old newspapers and books she borrowed from the small library in Alta. She wanted them to have opportunities she had never had, to understand that education was valuable even on a ranch in Arizona. Yates taught them about the land, about how to read weather signs, how to track animals, how to survive in the harsh desert environment. He taught them about hard work and responsibility, about keeping your word and treating people with respect. The children grew up strong and capable, shaped by the land and their parents' love. Samuel became tall and serious with his father's steady nature. Lily was more spirited, always asking questions, always pushing boundaries. When Samuel turned 16, Yates gave him his own horse and increased his responsibilities on the ranch. Samuel took to it eagerly, proud to be treated as a partner rather than just a helper. Lily, at 13, announced that she wanted to learn to rope and break horses like her father and brother. Fiona was hesitant, worried about her daughter getting hurt, but Yates insisted that if she wanted to learn, they should teach her. "She is your daughter," he told Fiona with a smile. "Stubborn and determined. She will do it whether we help her or not. Better that we teach her properly." So Lily learned to rope and ride, and she turned out to be just as skilled as her brother. Watching her daughter work alongside her husband and son, Fiona felt a fierce pride. This was the legacy they were creating, children who were strong and capable and unafraid of hard work. The years continued to pass, marked by seasons and small milestones. Samuel fell in love with a girl from Alta, the daughter of the general store owner. Yates and Fiona gave them their blessing, and they were married at the ranch, just as Yates and Fiona had been. A year later, Samuel and his wife presented them with their first grandchild, a little girl they named Rose. Holding her granddaughter, Fiona felt the circle of life completing itself. She thought about her own father, about how he had not lived to see any of this, and she felt a pang of sadness mixed with gratitude for all she had been given. Lily eventually fell in love as well, with a young rancher from the neighboring spread. It was a good match, two people who understood the demands and rewards of ranch life. They married when Lily was 20, and she and her husband took over a section of land that Yates deeded to them, expanding the family's holdings. As Fiona and Yates moved into their 50s, they began to slow down, letting Samuel and Lily take on more of the daily work of the ranch. But they were still active, still involved, just working at a more reasonable pace. One evening, they sat on the porch as they had done thousands of times before, watching the sunset. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, 4 of them now, ranging in age from infant to 10 years old. The sounds of their laughter and shouts filled the air. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if I had not found you that day?" Yates asked. It was a question he had asked before over the years, and Fiona's answer was always the same. "I try not to," she said, "because I cannot imagine any other life than this one. This is the only life I want." "I think about it sometimes," Yates admitted, "about how lucky I was, how easily I could have missed you, and then I would have spent my whole life alone, never knowing what I was missing." "But you did find me," Fiona said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "And you offered me everything when I thought I had nothing. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love. You gave me all of that too," Yates said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Everything good in my life came from finding you that day." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors. The ranch stretched out before them, thriving and beautiful. Their children and grandchildren filled the air with life and noise. Everything they had built together, everything they had created from nothing but hard work and love. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, Fiona thought about that day 30 years ago when she had walked through the desert, convinced she had nothing to offer anyone. She thought about how wrong she had been, how much she had inside her just waiting for the right person to help bring it out. Yates had been that person. He had seen her value when she could not see it herself. He had believed in her, invested in her, loved her. And together they had created something remarkable. "I love you," she whispered into the gathering darkness. "I love you too," Yates replied. "Always have, always will." The grandchildren were called inside for bed, and the ranch grew quiet. Fiona and Yates remained on the porch a while longer, just being together, not needing words. After more than 30 years of marriage, they could communicate in silence, understanding each other's thoughts and feelings without speaking. Eventually, they went inside to the house they had built, to the bed they shared. And as Fiona drifted off to sleep, held safe in her husband's arms, she thought about how grateful she was for every twist of fate that had led her to this moment. She had started with nothing, lost and alone in the desert, and now she had everything. A partner who cherished her, children who made her proud, grandchildren who brought joy to her days. She had a home, a purpose, a life full of meaning and love. Yates had been right all those years ago. She had offered him everything. But what she had not understood then and only learned over the years was that he had offered her everything too. They had saved each other, built each other up, created a life together that neither could have achieved alone. As the years passed into their 60s and then 70s, Fiona and Yates gradually stepped back from the physical work of ranching, though they remained actively involved in decisions and planning. Samuel ran the day-to-day operations now, with help from Lily and her husband. The ranch had grown significantly, now encompassing over 1,000 acres with a substantial herd. They had become respected elders in the community of Alta, known for their fairness in business dealings and their generosity to neighbors in need. When drought hit the region and several smaller ranchers were struggling, Yates and Fiona offered help without hesitation, providing feed and water for livestock, extending credit, doing what they could to ensure their neighbors survived the hard times. "We remember what it was like to have nothing," Fiona explained to Samuel when he questioned whether they could afford such generosity. "We remember how one person's kindness can change everything." On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children organized a celebration at the ranch. It seemed like everyone from Alta and the surrounding ranches came to honor them. There was music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. People stood up and told stories about Yates and Fiona, about their kindness, their hard work, their devotion to each other and their family. When it was Yates's turn to speak, he stood with Fiona at his side, his arm around her waist. 40 years ago, I found this woman walking alone in the desert," he began. "She was lost and scared and convinced she had nothing to offer the world, but I saw something different. I saw strength and courage and determination. I saw someone who just needed a chance to show what she was capable of." He paused, his voice becoming thick with emotion. "And she has exceeded every expectation. She has been my partner, my best friend, the love of my life. She has given me children and grandchildren. She has made our ranch prosper. She has made every day of the last 40 years worth living. When she whispered that she had nothing to offer, I told her she was offering me everything. And I was right. She gave me everything I could ever want or need." There was not a dry eye in the crowd. Fiona was crying openly, and Yates pulled her close, kissing her forehead as everyone cheered and applauded. Later, when the guests had gone and they were alone in their bedroom, Fiona looked at her reflection in the mirror. She was 71 now, her hair silver, her face lined with wrinkles, but her eyes still sparkled with life and love. Yates came up behind her, meeting her gaze in the mirror. "Still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," he said. "You are biased," Fiona replied, but she was smiling. "Absolutely," Yates agreed, "but also correct. They had a few more good years together. Years of watching grandchildren grow and great-grandchildren arrive. Years of sitting on the porch and remembering the life they had lived. Years of gratitude for every day they had been given." When Yates died at 81, peacefully in his sleep with Fiona beside him, she felt as though a part of herself had been torn away. They had been together for more than 45 years, had built a life and a legacy together. The pain of losing him was almost unbearable, but she was not alone. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her with love and support, and she could feel Yates's presence still in every corner of the ranch, in every sunset they had watched together, in the family they had created. Fiona lived for another 8 years, dying at the age of 84. She remained active and involved almost to the end, still offering advice about the ranch, still tending a small portion of the garden, still telling stories to her great-grandchildren about the old days. On her last day, surrounded by family, she smiled and spoke her final words. "I am going to see him now," she said. "I am going home to Yates." And then she closed her eyes and was gone. They buried her next to Yates on a hill overlooking the ranch, the place where he had proposed so many years before. The entire community turned out for the funeral, paying respects to a woman who had been a pillar of their community, a friend to many, a loving wife and mother and grandmother and great-grandmother. At the funeral, Samuel spoke about his mother, about her strength and courage, about how she had built something from nothing. "My mother arrived in Arizona with no money, no family, no prospects," he said. "She could have given up, could have accepted that she was destined for a life of poverty and struggle. But she did not. She found her strength, found her purpose, found love, and she built a legacy that will continue for generations. The ranch she and my father built still thrives. The family they created still grows. The love they shared still inspires us all. The legacy did continue. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through the generations." Great-great-grandchildren who never met Yates and Fiona learned their story, learned about the love and determination that had built the foundation of their family's prosperity. The ranch house was preserved and expanded, and the room where Yates and Fiona had spent so many evenings talking by the fire became a place where family gathered to remember and celebrate. Their story was told and retold, becoming almost legendary. The rancher who found a woman in the desert. The woman who thought she had nothing but offered everything. The love that grew from a simple act of kindness. The town of Alta eventually erected a small monument in the main square, honoring the contributions Yates and Fiona Johnson had made to the community. It bore a simple inscription, "In memory of Yates and Fiona Johnson, who proved that love and hard work can build a legacy that lasts forever." Decades passed, and the world changed. Arizona became a state. The wild frontier became settled and civilized. The harsh desert land was tamed and developed. But the story of Yates and Fiona remained, a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of partnership, and the transformative nature of love. Their great-great-grandchildren still worked the ranch, still tended the land that Yates had claimed and Fiona had helped build into something prosperous. The cattle still grazed on the acres they had expanded over the years. The garden still produced vegetables in the same spot where Fiona had first learned to grow food in the harsh Arizona soil. And sometimes, when the sun set over the desert in a blaze of orange and pink and purple, the current generation of Johnsons would pause in their work and look out over the land, and they would think about the two people who had started it all. The rancher who had offered kindness to a stranger. The woman who had found her strength when she thought she had none. The love story that had begun with a simple act of compassion in the middle of the desert. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important moments in life come from unexpected places. That the chance encounters, the small kindnesses, the willingness to take a risk on someone or something, can change the course of not just one life but many generations. Yates had not known, when he offered water to a desperate woman walking alone through the desert, that he was beginning a story that would last more than a century. He had simply acted on instinct and kindness, seeing someone in need and choosing to help. And Fiona had not known, when she accepted that help from a stranger, that she was stepping into a life that would be filled with more love and purpose than she had ever imagined. She had simply been trying to survive, to find a way forward after losing everything. But together, through hard work and commitment and love, they had created something remarkable. A family, a legacy, a love story for the ages. The ranch continued to thrive season after season, year after year, generation after generation. The land that Yates had claimed and Fiona had helped build remained productive and beautiful. The family they had started continued to grow and flourish. and the love they had shared, that deep and abiding partnership that had sustained them through hard times and good, remained as an inspiration and example. In the end, that was the true legacy of Yates and Fiona Johnson. Not just the land or the prosperity or even the large and thriving family, but the proof that love could transform lives, that kindness could change destinies, that two people who started with nothing could build everything. When Fiona had whispered that she had nothing to offer, Yates had seen the truth that she could not yet see herself. She was offering her strength, her courage, her capacity for love. She was offering the possibility of partnership, of building something together. She was offering everything that truly mattered, and Yates had offered the same in return. Not just shelter and food and work, but belief and trust and love. He had offered her a place to belong, a purpose to fulfill, a partnership to build. He had offered her everything she needed to become the remarkable woman she was always meant to be. Their story, which had begun with such pain and loss and uncertainty, had become something beautiful. A testament to resilience, to hope, to the transformative power of love. It was a reminder that sometimes the hardest moments in life are actually the beginning of something wonderful, if we are brave enough to keep going, to accept help when it is offered, to open our hearts to possibilities we cannot yet see. The sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in brilliant colors, just as it had done on that evening so many years ago when Yates had proposed to Fiona. The ranch was quiet now, the day's work complete. In the distance, cattle lowed softly. A horse whinnied from the barn. The wind rustled through the garden where vegetables grew in neat rows. And somewhere, in the memory of all who knew their story, Yates and Fiona Johnson lived on, still in love, still partners, still proving that sometimes when we think we have nothing to offer, we actually have everything.